My fiancée canceled our wedding saying, "I deserve someone on my level, not you." I accepted it calmly and walked away. Months later, she attended a wedding at the same venue and realized I was the groom standing there. "I deserve someone on my level." She said it the way people say past the salt. Flat, unbothered. Like the sentence didn't just detonate 4 years of my life in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. I stood there holding a cup of coffee I'd made for her, still warm, the way she always liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk, stirred not shaken, and I just looked at her. Not with anger, not with tears, with this strange, hollow stillness that I didn't fully understand until much later. She was sitting on the edge of the couch in my apartment, scrolling her phone with one hand and gesturing vaguely with the other, like she was canceling a subscription service, not a wedding that was 43 days away. "I've been thinking about it for a while," she continued. "You're a good person, but good isn't enough anymore." I set the coffee down on the table between us. She didn't reach for it. That small detail told me everything I needed to know about where we actually were. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known in that moment, was that the same venue where she just canceled our wedding would be the exact place she'd watch me marry someone else. And that the look on her face when she realized it was me standing at that altar would be something I'd remember for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction, with something quieter than that. Something that felt more like closure. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29. She was 28. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. Her name was Claire. Mine doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that we met at a mutual friend's dinner party, fell into something that felt easy and comfortable and good, and spent 4 years building what I thought was a shared life. I didn't realize then how differently we each defined the word shared. Claire came from a family with money. Not obscene money, but the kind of money where you grow up with a cleaner twice a week, summers abroad, and the unspoken assumption that your life will always look a certain way. I didn't. My parents were both teachers. We were comfortable, but comfort meant something different in my house. It meant no debt, a warm kitchen, and the kind of love that doesn't need to announce itself. Claire knew this about me from the beginning. She said she admired it. She used words like grounded and real and refreshing when she talked about me to her friends in the early years. I should have paid closer attention to the fact that those words slowly stopped appearing in her vocabulary somewhere around year 3. I noticed. I filed it away. I told myself it was just the natural shift from new love to settled love. I was wrong. It wasn't settling in. It was settling for. The months before the breakup, I'd been under a lot of pressure at work. I was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm. Good work, honest work, the kind of job that builds actual things people live in and use every day. I wasn't pulling in 6 figures yet. I was close, but not there. Claire had recently gotten a promotion at her marketing firm, and with it came a new social circle. New colleagues. New after-work dinners at restaurants I'd never suggest because I was quietly tracking our savings for the wedding. New conversations I kept getting left out of because I didn't know the right references or the right people or the right way to hold a wine glass at a tasting event, apparently. She started saying things like, "You should network more." Then, "You should dress differently when you come to my work events." Then, "Sometimes I feel like we want different things." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped in still water. I felt the ripples. I just didn't understand they were leading somewhere until it was too late. The Sunday she ended it, she hadn't come over for any particular reason. There was no fight leading up to it. No dramatic argument the night before. She just showed up, sat down, and began. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "About us. About my life. Where I'm headed. What I need." I sat across from her. Something in my chest had already gone quiet. Like some part of me had received the signal before my brain caught up. "I think we're at different places," she said. "Okay," I said. "I don't mean that harshly." "Okay." She looked up from her phone then. Maybe my tone surprised her. I wasn't being aggressive. I was being empty. "I've worked really hard to get where I am," she continued. "I know you have," I said. "And I need someone who matches that. Who moves at the same pace." "Who?" She paused. Searched for the phrasing. Found it. "Someone on my level." For words. The coffee sat between us, going cold. "I'm not saying you're not a good person," she added quickly. "I know," I said. "I just think." "Claire." She stopped. I don't think I'd ever interrupted her before. "You don't have to explain it," I said. I understood after the first sentence. She blinked. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm not going to beg you to stay. I wasn't expecting you to." "Good." I stood up. Picked up both cups, walked to the kitchen and poured them both down the sink. Watched the coffee spiral away. Came back to the living room and stood there with my hands in my pockets. Do you need help with logistics? I asked. The venue deposit is in both our names. She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't speak. I'll handle the calls, I said. You don't have to. It's fine. Are you okay? I thought about that for a second. I'll be fine, I said, which wasn't the same thing, but it was true. She left 20 minutes later. No dramatic exit. No tears. She hugged me at the door with the careful politeness of someone who's already mentally filed you under resolved. I stood in the doorway and watched her car pull out of the parking lot. Then I went back inside, sat on the floor of my living room. Not the couch, the floor, and stayed there for a long time. I didn't cry that night. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the silence of a life that had just been quietly rearranged without my permission. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted in me. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Well, that came later. Something more like clarity. She'd told me I wasn't on her level. And the thing was, I hadn't argued. Not because I agreed, but because some quiet, stubborn part of me already knew what I was going to do about it. The wedding cancellation calls were not fun. I made every single one myself. The venue coordinator, a composed woman named Diana, took my call professionally and walked me through the cancellation policy. We lost a portion of the deposit. I didn't tell Claire how much. It was the last thing I ever absorbed on her behalf. After that, I called the caterer, the photographer, the florist. Each call was a small, clean cut. My best friend Owen called me 3 days after he heard. Tell me you're not just sitting alone in that apartment, he said. I'm not, I said. Are you lying? A little. I'm coming over. You don't have. Already in the car. Owen showed up with a truly unreasonable amount of food and a bottle of good whiskey and the rare gift of knowing when not to ask questions. We sat on my balcony that night until well past midnight. He didn't make me talk about Claire. He talked about other things. Work, a trip he wanted to take, a terrible movie he'd seen recently. And somewhere around the second glass, I started talking anyway. Not about pain. About plans. I've been putting off a career move, I said. Because of the wedding? Because of a lot of things. Owen nodded. There's a firm in the city, I said. Alderson and Vance. They've been trying to recruit me for 2 years. And I've been saying no because Claire didn't want to deal with the transition period. Owen was quiet for a moment. Call them Monday, he said. It's been 2 years. They've probably moved on. Call them anyway. I did. They hadn't moved on. The next 6 months were the hardest and most focused of my entire life. I took the position at Alderson and Vance. The role was bigger than anything I'd handled before, leading a structural review team on a major commercial development project in the city. The hours were punishing. There were weeks where I barely saw daylight outside of commuting. I worked. I ate. I slept. I worked. Owen kept tabs on me, made sure I surfaced for air occasionally. I lost weight initially from the stress and irregular meals, then gained it back in muscle from the gym I started going to at 6 a.m. because it was the only hour I could reliably control. I wasn't doing any of it to prove something to Claire. That's the honest truth, and I want to be clear about it. I was doing it because something in me had finally stopped waiting for permission. She'd said I wasn't on her level, and I'd realized, standing at that sink, watching the coffee drain, that I'd been operating at a fraction of my actual ceiling. Not because I lacked ability, because I'd been quietly making myself smaller to keep things comfortable. Not just with Claire, with everything. I should tell you about the moment I understood what had really been happening. It was about 6 weeks after the breakup. A colleague at the old firm, a woman named Patricia, no wait, her name was Donna, reached out to invite me to a small birthday gathering. I almost said no. I went anyway. At the gathering, I ran into a man named Colin who dated Claire years before me. We got to talking. Nothing dramatic. Just casual conversation the way you do at a party where you only know one person. At some point, her name came up. Oh, you were with Claire? He said. Up until recently, yeah. He nodded with this expression I couldn't quite read. She's something, he said. What does that mean? He shrugged. Smart. Beautiful. Driven. Also, and I mean this with no malice, she has a very specific picture in her head of how her life should look. I know, I said. The problem, he continued, is that the picture changes. I looked at him. When I was with her, I was finishing my MBA, he said. High ambition. Good trajectory. She loved it. What happened? I took a job I actually wanted instead of the one that looked best on paper, he said. And that was it. He smiled. She said I wasn't thinking about the future the way she was. The party noise carried on around us. I held my drink and thought about that. I thought about how when I'd first met Claire, I was 2 years into a promising track at my firm. I thought about how she'd used words like grounded and real when describing me. I thought about how those words had slowly been replaced by comfortable, and then stagnant, and then nothing at all. I thought about Colin's word, picture. She had a picture, and slowly, without telling me, she'd decided I didn't fit in it anymore. The cruelty wasn't in the breakup. It was in the silence before it. All those months of signals I'd registered but dismissed. All those adjustments I'd made, trying to fit an outline that kept quietly shifting. She hadn't loved who I was. She'd loved who she thought I was becoming. And when I became someone other than that image, when I chose steady over spectacular, she recalculated. That night, I drove home and sat with that for a while. And then I made a decision. No more fractions. Full ceiling. Whatever that cost. 5 months in, things started to move. The project at Alderson and Vance was going well. Exceptionally well, if I'm being honest. Our team finished the structural review ahead of schedule, identified a load-bearing issue that saved the client somewhere in the range of a significant amount of budget, and my name ended up in the room for the first time in conversations I'd never previously been invited to. My salary adjusted, then adjusted again, a 6-figure number that felt surreal to type into a spreadsheet. I'm not going to pretend the money wasn't gratifying. It was. But what was more gratifying was the feeling of operating without the handbrake on, of moving at the actual pace I was capable of instead of the pace I'd unconsciously agreed to maintain for someone else's comfort. Owen came over for dinner one evening around this time. He looked around my apartment, which I'd finally furnished properly, no longer the half-decorated compromise space it had been when Claire's aesthetic preferences had silently vetoed anything I'd actually liked. Something's different, he said. I bought furniture. No, you're different. I thought about it. I think I'm just myself, I said. Owen nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That's what's different. I met Leah at a work event in month 7. She was there representing an architecture firm that had partnered with Alderson and Vance on the development project. She was standing near the window with a glass of sparkling water, talking to a colleague, and she was laughing at something he'd said, a full, unguarded laugh that she didn't bother to soften. I liked that immediately. We got introduced through a mutual contact on the project team. Her handshake was firm. She looked me in the eye when she talked. She asked about a technical decision we'd made in the structural review with the kind of specificity that told me she'd actually read the report. Most people at these things haven't touched the documentation, I said. Most people at these things are here for the canapes, she said. Fair. I read everything I'm attached to, she said. Even the boring parts. Especially the boring parts, I agreed. She smiled. Good answer. We talked for 40 minutes at that event. When the room started thinning, she handed me her card. I may have more questions about the load analysis, she said. Professionally speaking. Professionally, I confirmed. She walked away. I looked at the card. I smiled for the first time in months without having to decide to. We had coffee that week, then dinner the following week, then a walk through the city on a Saturday evening that stretched from one end of it to the other and still didn't feel long enough. Leah is different from anyone I'd been with before. She was warm but not soft, honest in a way that didn't need to be sharpened into cruelty. She told me on our 3rd date that she'd ended a long engagement the previous year. Do you want to talk about it? I asked. Not particularly, she said. He was a good person who wanted to stay comfortable. I wanted to keep moving. We were kind about it. I nodded. What about you? She asked. Similar thing, I said. Except the kind part didn't fully apply. She studied me. Her words or yours? Both, probably, I said. She said I wasn't on her level. Leah was quiet for a moment. And what did you say? Nothing, I said. I just walked away. She looked at me for a long time after that. That's the right answer, she said finally. Most people argue when they should just leave. Here's what I should tell you that I've been holding back, because this is where the story changes shape. About a month into seeing Leah, Owen told me something over the phone. Claire was seeing someone new, a man named Brendan. Brendan was, according to what Owen had gathered, exactly the picture she'd always been working toward. Finance, well-dressed, the kind of social calendar that reads like a highlight reel. I'm telling you because it's going to reach you eventually, Owen said. And I want you to hear it from someone who's actually on your side. I appreciate that, I said. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. Like she found what she was looking for, I said. Which is good. That's it. That's it. Owen was quiet. You're different, he said again. People keep telling me that. People aren't wrong. I was quiet. I'm seeing someone, I said. Owen made it sound like I'd told him I'd won the lottery. Tell me everything. There's a specific moment in a relationship, if you're paying attention, when you realize it's the real thing. Not the thrilling, anxious, early thing. The real thing. For me, it was a Tuesday evening, about 2 months in. I'd had a brutal day. A subcontractor had flagged a materials issue on the development project that needed to be resolved by morning, or it would push back the entire timeline. I was at my desk at 9 p.m., surrounded by reports and schematics, tension in every part of my shoulders. Leah texted, "Still at the office?" Me, "Yeah, probably until midnight." Her, "Eaten anything?" I looked around my desk. An empty coffee cup. Me, define eaten. 35 minutes later, she knocked on the office door. She'd brought food. Not fancy takeout. Just a container of leftover pasta she'd made. Still warm because she'd kept it against her jacket. She didn't stay. She handed it over, said, "Eat. You're useless to the building if you collapse," kissed me on the cheek, and left. I stood in that empty office holding a container of pasta and felt something so certain and simple that it almost knocked the breath out of me. I called Owen the next day. "I think I'm going to marry her," I said. He didn't miss a beat. "About time you figured that out," he said. I proposed on a clear evening in early spring, 8 months after we met. A quiet place. No spectacle. Just the two of us and a ring I'd chosen with more care than I'd applied to anything non-structural in my life. She said yes before I finished the question. Then she told me off for making her cry in public. We started planning the wedding. We looked at venues. We found one we both loved, a beautifully restored heritage property outside the city. Elegant without being cold. Stone walls and garden paths and light that came through the windows in the late afternoon like it had been specifically arranged to do so. We booked it without hesitation. It wasn't until I was reviewing the contract with the venue coordinator, a composed woman named Diana, that I realized. It was the same venue. Not a similar one. The same one. The same stone hallway. The same garden. The same coordinator, who looked at me with a professional smile and said, "We're so happy to have you back." She didn't mean anything by it. She handled dozens of events. But I stood there for a moment, holding the contract, and let the strangeness of it settle. The same place. I didn't tell Leah. It wasn't relevant. It wasn't a sign or a statement. It was just a good venue. The best one we'd seen. I signed the contract. The wedding planning process with Leah was the inverse of every experience I'd had doing the same thing with Claire. With Claire, every decision had been a quiet negotiation. Her preferences presented as preferences, but subtly weighted as requirements. My suggestions received with a diplomatic hesitation that meant no, but let me rephrase it so you don't feel dismissed. With Leah, everything was direct. "I don't care about flowers," she said in our second planning meeting. "Great, then I'll pick them. Don't make them weird." Define weird. Anything that looks like it belongs in a funeral or a horror film. So no black roses. Obviously no black roses. We laughed. It was that easy. The caterer, the music, the order of the ceremony. Everything came together with a collaborative ease that made me realize how much of the previous experience had been quietly exhausting. Owen agreed to be my best man without me even finishing the question. Leah's older sister, a calm and funny woman named Cara, was her maid of honor. The guest list was intimate. People we actually wanted in the room, not a performance for social currency. Everything was quiet and purposeful and right. 3 days before the wedding, Owen called me. "So," he said, "Claire is going to be at your venue." I stopped. "What?" "She got invited to a wedding there," he said. "Someone she works with." I just found out. Same weekend. Same day. Different time slot. They're using the garden space in the late afternoon. Your ceremony's in the morning. I sat with this for a moment. "Are you going to say something?" Owen asked. "What would I say?" "I don't know. Are you worried about it?" "No." "Are you sure?" "She'll see what she sees," I said. "That's not something I need to manage." Owen was quiet for a beat. "You know," he said, "most people would either be dreading that or secretly excited." "I'm neither," I said. "I just want to get married." "Fair enough," he said. And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. What happened that day wasn't something I engineered. It wasn't something I hoped for. It was just something that happened, the way certain things do when life decides it has a sense of irony. The morning of my wedding was one of those rare days where the weather seems to be personally in your favor. Clear sky, warm without being hot. That specific early summer light that makes everything look like it was shot on expensive film. Owen showed up at the suite with coffee and no drama. which is exactly what I needed from my best man and exactly what he delivered. How do you feel? He asked. Good, I said. Actually good? Or performing good? Owen, I'm asking. Actually good, I said. The kind of good that's quiet. He nodded. That's the right kind, he said. We got ready. The suit fit exactly as it should. Not a costume, not armor, just the right thing to wear on the right day. The ceremony was in the main hall, with the light coming through those large stone-framed windows the way I'd noticed when we first toured the venue. The guests settled. The music began. I took my place at the altar and turned to watch Leah come through the door. I'm not going to describe that moment in great detail, because some things don't need to be translated. I will say that she was walking toward me with the same quiet certainty she brought to everything, like she'd made her decision and was entirely at peace with it, which was all I'd ever needed from anyone. The ceremony was everything we'd planned. Simple, honest, ours. When the officiant said the final words and I slid the ring onto her finger, Leah squeezed my hand once, quick and firm, and I understood every single thing she was communicating. We were married. The reception was in the adjacent hall, the celebration carrying on with the warmth and noise of people who were genuinely happy to be there. Owen gave a speech that managed to be both funny and sincere without tipping into either extreme. Kara gave one that made Leah cry, which made Leah annoyed, which made everyone laugh. We danced. We ate. We moved from table to table talking to people we actually liked. It was, without exaggeration, the best day I'd had in years. Maybe ever. It was mid-afternoon, maybe an hour into the reception, when Owen appeared at my elbow. I knew from his expression that something had happened. Not bad. Just something. She's here, he said quietly. The garden event? He nodded. Their timing shifted earlier. They're coming through the stone corridor on the way to the garden space. I looked toward the hall's large open entrance. The corridor beyond it was visible from where we were standing, a long, beautiful passageway that connected the main building to the garden terrace on the other side. And then I saw her. Claire. She was moving through the corridor with a group of people, her colleague's wedding party, I assumed. She was dressed elegantly. She looked exactly as I remembered, but she was looking down at her phone as she walked, half listening to something the woman next to her was saying. And then she looked up. I don't know what she was expecting to see. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a room full of strangers at some other couple's event. But the corridor opened directly into the line of sight from where I was standing. And I was standing there in a wedding suit, with a boutonniere, and a ring on my left hand, and Leah beside me, talking to her sister, laughing at something. I watched Claire's face process the scene in real time. First, recognition. The particular stillness of that someone I know. Then, confusion. Why is he here? What is this? Then, the calculation. Her eyes moved from me to Leah to the room behind us to the flowers to the wedding cake visible on the table in the far corner. Then back to me. I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't smiling with intent. I wasn't doing the thing where you try to look as good as possible because you know someone is watching. I was just standing there, at my wedding, being exactly where I was. Her expression shifted in a way I didn't fully have a name for. Not devastation, not anger. Something more like the feeling of opening a door expecting one room and finding an entirely different one. A recalculation. The picture in her head, adjusting. Our eyes met for just a second. Neither of us moved. Then someone in her group said something, and she looked away, and the group continued moving through the corridor toward the garden. She didn't stop. She didn't come in. She walked past. Leah appeared at my side a moment later. You okay? She said. Yeah. She followed my eyes briefly toward the corridor, now empty. She didn't ask. She'd known, in a general way, that Claire existed in my history the way any significant person does, as a fact, not a wound. She placed her hand on my arm. Dance with me, she said. Not a question. I turned from the corridor. Yeah, I said. Let's do that. We danced. The music was something slow and unhurried. Leah had her hand on my shoulder and I had mine at her waist, and we moved the way people do when they're not performing the dancing, but actually just being there. You know, she said quietly. Kara told me something once. What? She said the test of whether something is right for you is how you feel in the quiet moments. Not the big ones. Not the big ones, she said. Anyone can feel something in the big ones. The fireworks and the speeches and the champagne. But the quiet Tuesday evenings. The driving in the car. The making coffee in the morning. I thought about a Tuesday evening. A container of pasta, still warm. Yeah, I said. I know what you mean. She looked up at me. Good, she said simply. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Here's what I heard afterward, through Owen, who heard it from someone who'd been in the garden that afternoon. Claire had been quiet for most of the event. Her colleague's wedding was beautiful. I'd later learn it was a genuinely lovely ceremony. But Claire had sat at a garden table in the late afternoon and barely spoken. At one point, her friend had leaned over and asked if she was all right. Claire had said she was fine, just tired, just thinking. I don't know what she was thinking about. I'm not going to speculate, because I don't think it serves either of us to do that. What I know is that she attended a wedding that day, and she left knowing that I had too. There's a version of this story where I want you to believe I'd been working and building and grinding specifically so that moment in the corridor could happen, so that she could see, so that the universe could deliver a neat and satisfying reversal. But that's not the truth. The truth is that I built what I built because something in me finally understood, after all those years of quiet calibration and careful smallness, that I was capable of more than I'd been offering. Not more than she deserved. More than I'd been giving myself. The corridor moment wasn't the point. It was just a moment. A small, strange, honest moment where two people who had once stood at the edge of a life together looked at each other from entirely different places, and then each turned back to where they were going. I'm writing this from the back porch of the house Leah, and I moved into 3 months after the wedding. It's evening. She's inside on a call, pacing the kitchen the way she does when she's problem-solving, gesturing occasionally at no one. I can hear her through the open window. The way she phrases questions. The way she pushes back on things with precision and no apology. The way she laughs when something genuinely surprises her. I have a cup of coffee going cold next to me because I got distracted writing. 2 sugars. No oat milk. The way I actually like it, not the way I learned to make it for someone else. Owen came over for dinner last week. He looked around the house. Our house, with its actual furniture and its organized chaos and its evidence of 2 specific people living in it fully, and he said the same thing he's been saying since all of this started. You're different. And I said the same thing I always say now. No, I said, I'm just myself. He smiled, finished his drink. Yeah, he said quietly. That's the one. I think about that Sunday afternoon sometimes. The apartment. The coffee going cold. The 4 words that landed like stones. Someone on my level. I used to replay it and feel the echo of something. Not quite hurt. Not quite anger. Just that hollow stillness. But now when I go back to it, I see something different. I see a door closing. And behind me, another one opening. One I wouldn't have walked through if the first hadn't shut. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to root against Claire. She was not a villain. She was a person with a picture in her head, and I was someone who stopped fitting in it. That's a human thing to experience on both sides. I've made peace with that. What I want you to understand, if there's anything in this worth carrying, is that the moment she said I wasn't enough, I made a choice. Not to fight, not to plead, not to become exactly what she described, just to prove her wrong. I just left, and then I became what I was capable of being all along. Not for her, not for the corridor moment, not for any audience, for the Tuesday evenings, for the quiet cup of coffee the way I actually like it, for the woman inside pacing my kitchen right now, gesturing at nobody, solving something I'll ask about when she's done, for a life that fits, not because I squeezed myself into the right shape, but because I finally stopped pretending the wrong shape was fine. The venue coordinator, Diana, sent us a card after the wedding, a handwritten one, which I thought was a nice touch. She said it was one of the most peaceful weddings she'd seen in years. You both seemed entirely sure, she wrote. That's rarer than you'd think. I kept the card. It's on the desk in my home office, next to a photograph from that afternoon. Me and Leah, the stone hallway behind us. Light coming through the windows just the way it always did. Both of us looking at each other instead of the camera, because someone called her name right as the shutter clicked. She's midlife. I'm watching her like I can't quite believe she's real. Which, some days, I still can't. She's off the call now. I can hear her footsteps in the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet opening. The particular cadence of someone who knows where everything is because it's their home. She appears at the back door a moment later, leaning against the frame with her own coffee. She looks at me looking at this. What are you writing? She says. A story, I say. About what? I look at the screen. I look at her. About a Sunday afternoon, I say. And everything that happened after. She considers this. Is it a good story? I close the laptop. Yeah, I say. It ends well. She smiles, that full, unguarded smile I liked from the very first moment, and comes to sit beside me. The evening settles around us. The coffee steams. The light fades slowly, the way good things do when they're not in a hurry. And somewhere across the city, in a life that runs parallel to mine but no longer intersects it, I imagine Claire is also somewhere, building something, looking for her picture. I hope she finds it. I genuinely do. But I stopped being the frame for it a long time ago. She said I wasn't on her level. She was right. I was somewhere else entirely. I just hadn't gotten there yet. And the coffee she never reached for that Sunday afternoon? I've never made it that way since.